There had once been a certain experiment. But it was an experiment she had known nothing of. She was a perfectly ordinary housewife and had been blessed with a second child in her womb before turning 40. No, perhaps perfectly ordinary might not have fit her quite so well. After all, her eldest daughter was already old enough to enter high school, a 15-year gap from the second child. She had been slightly worried that her eldest daughter, adolescent that she was, would oppose the pregnancy. However, the exact opposite proved to be true. Her daughter's heart sang when she heard the news. Her husband, an established scientist, often lost himself in his research and faith, and rarely ever came home to his family. But when he was home, he always did his best to be a good husband and a father. So while she housed some dissatisfactions, they would never surpass the love that she held for her husband. Her second child was delivered without issue, a healthy girl of 2,579 grams. She named the child Mana. Soon after, her husband was unfortunately made to transfer far away. Her husband held no capacity to support himself with even the most basic of life skills, forcing her to ask her stable daughter to go with him and tend to her father's needs. Since she was now living alone with the newborn Mana, they then opted to move to an affordable company housing as part of her husband's plan. She had initially been living in an apartment within the suburbs, but this made transport inconvenient. The new company house, however, was in the best area in Shibuya, and many of her husband's colleagues' families lived close by. Her considerate husband claimed that because of this, there would be nothing to worry about in her times of need, including when she needed help with the baby. Every room in the company house was spacious, and she particularly favored the bedroom. One wall was home to a large mirror, and the opposite wall had an even larger window. From there, she could view the luscious greenery of Yoyogi Park. She then went on to quickly befriend a housewife living close by and received extraordinary treatment from the company, namely being provided a housekeeper. She was proud of her husband for holding such an important position within his company, one that allowed her to live in such a luxurious way. And so her life without worries, nor dissatisfaction continued. 2 years passed. While Mana had experienced delayed growth, she had grown into a healthy child, all while not contracting any major illnesses. She was a very pampered child. If she did not cradle Mana in her arms, the girl would start crying in a voice so shrill it could shatter even the thickest glass. Regrettably, she had fallen ill about a month prior. A particularly grave symptom was a fierce tinnitus, something she suffered from throughout most hours of the day. Fortunately for her, the housekeeper and the housewife next door were more than willing to assist her with taking care of Mana. Regardless of the help she received, she was essentially joined at the hip with Mana and was never able to part from her, even for a moment. Even when going to the bathroom, even when taking a bath, if a thought were to even cross her mind about having the housekeeper cradle the baby for a short time, Mana would detect those intentions and immediately burst into tears. Contrary to what one might surmise, she actually found endearment in how much Mana clung to her. But due to the inseparability of the two, she continued to live a life where she could never take even a single step out of her own home. Her lifestyle was entirely supported by the housekeeper and the housewife. For her, meeting the two had become her true saving grace. However, over time, something odd began to happen with the two helpers. During a friendly chat in the living room that had occurred a week prior, the housewife had spontaneously vomited without warning. Paying no heed to the confusion she showed, the housewife then rushed outside. she had not seen her since, leaving her to worry that she had perhaps fallen ill. Concerned, she decided to ask the housekeeper if she could check on her. As the housekeeper left that day, she made her request, concluding with an, "I'd love your help tomorrow as well, dear." And yet when the housekeeper heard these words, she suddenly burst into tears and could only nod again and again as she departed. The tinnitus that had been tormenting her so became fiercer that night, to the point where it might felt as if her head itself might split apart. She tried calling an ambulance, but the line refused to connect. She then tried going outside to ask the neighboring housewife for help, but even that proved too much for her. Throughout all of this, her daughter continued to cry incessantly, further agitating her pain. In order to endure this terrible pain, she embraced her beloved Mana. And as she did so, both the tinnitus and the crying abruptly stopped. The pain in her head vanished just as suddenly, almost as if it had never been there to begin with. She then looked down, only to see that the child she was holding was now a mummified corpse. Okay. In spite of how heavily it had been crying until that very moment, the body had suddenly become a desiccated, rotting mound of flesh, one that gave off the most repulsive stench. And so before she could ever realize it was all an experiment, her mind broke. The child she had been given birth to was probably dead. But her perception was changed to believing it was a beautiful child. And that's why the housekeeper threw up. They couldn't handle it anymore. There had once been a certain experiment, but it was an experiment that ran different to how he had hypothesized. He was a scientist at Nozomi Technology, a follower of the Cosmic Church of the Divine Light, the man at the center of Nozomi's strictly confidential Project Noah, and the man that had deciphered fundamentals to the 10th power times interactions to the 40th power equals IR2. Jesus Christ. Wait a minute, isn't that the same helmet that fucking Ayase was put in? He had offered his wife on the verge of childbirth as a test subject for the experiment. While that had been an instruction from the founder that he revered, it had been just as much of his own suggestion, all to ensure the success of the experiment. Wow, you are a monster. It was christened the Mana Experiment, after the codename given to their second daughter. His eldest daughter, 15, was placed in a Cosmic Church of the Divine Light institution, all while he observed his confined wife and infant child for 24 hours a day. His wife had been led to believe that the place she resided in was a company house, but in reality, it was a test site that Nozomi Technology had prepared. A site containing the Noah 2 prototype he was developing. Mind reading, visual projection, and control over the 5 senses. In order to research the effects of such practices, he locked his wife and daughter Mana in the site as test subjects. Not much was known about the effects of electromagnetic radiation on the human body, so he very much intended to halt the experiment immediately if his wife or child showed any strange abnormalities. The experiment was then met with an unfortunate accident soon after it began. Mana passed away at 1 month of age. Her cause of death, unknown. 1 month? It was an accident nobody could have prevented. Was it like SIDS? Sudden infant death syndrome? He was overcome with sorrow and attempted to bring the experiment to a close, and yet such a thing was not permitted to him.
実に興味深いではないですか。
Those were the words of his employer. His employer was referring to the bizarre sight visible within the experiment. His wife did not seem to recognize Mana's death as real, and instead treated her remains as if they were still her child. In her eyes, Mana had never died, but in truth, these things were all a simple projection, a reality only she was privy to. This was an effect of the Noah 2 prototype, and in a certain sense, the situation provided an optimal opportunity to test its capabilities. And yet you still did it even though you knew what was going on. Consequently, he had his wishes disregarded. Eventually, even he came to think that continuing the experiment would be best, for his wife's sake. Well, shit, I'm sorry, I'm just kind of sitting here like, this is a situation like, how the hell do you... Damn. I mean, it's cruel that he's continuing the experiment, but like, how do you... Well, I mean, I'm also putting the blame on his employer, but he deserves some of the blame that he still decided that I'm going to continue this for like some twisted thought like it would be better if my wife doesn't realize that our child is dead and that in fact I've just been experimenting on her this whole time. Like, I don't know. It's a fucked up situation. It's an unbelievably fucked up situation. Looking upon the one-way mirror, his wife would embrace the corpse of their child and lived her every day in blissful happiness. She would gaze through the window toward the greenery of Yoyogi Park, but in reality the window was a mere wallpaper, and the scenery a projection, and yet she simply smiled at the view, all while gently tending to her child as she cooed. Staff belonging to the research team would take care of his wife, with one playing the role of a neighboring housewife and the other a housekeeper. As long as the experiment continued, her mind would never break. As such, he told himself that this was all for his wife's sake. Though in truth, perhaps his mind had broken far before his wife's ever could. At some point in time, his goal had changed from completing Noah 2 to forcing his wife to continue living an endless dream. That tinnitus was the machine that she was hooked up to, though. After continuing the experiment for 2 years, his employer suddenly announced an end to the project.
データは十分取れました。ノア2本格稼働は間近です。この実験ももう続ける意味はないでしょう。
We're just now going to break your wife's mind. Ta-ta! He vehemently opposed this, his desperation evident. And yet this passion had him branded a traitor, and he was subsequently removed from the project. As a gesture of kindness, he was permitted to be present at the test site on the final day of the experiment, albeit within restraints. And with him, his daughter, of whom he had not seen across those 2 full years, was forced to be present. A look of bewilderment rose to her face when she noticed him.
父さん、これはどういうこと？
Sana!
母さんに何をしたの？
It's no fucking wonder she hates him!
母さんが抱いているの。一体。
He was unable to answer. His guilt over what he had done prevented him from looking his daughter in the eye. Meanwhile, the start of a ghastly ritual was drawing near. The housewife had long since become unable to endure Mana's rotting stench, and the housekeeper had left the test site in tears in response to his wife's words. Then, the equipment was stopped. The dream ended. And his wife broke. In her eyes, what was once her child had suddenly transformed into a mummy, a sight that brought her to scratch at her scalp, tear out her hair, dig her fingernails into the flesh of her face, and then began to ravenously devour the desiccated body of her own child. Through every tear of flesh, she continued to laugh maniacally, bang her head against the wall, before eventually she took a kitchen knife and drove the blade into her own eyes and died right where she stood. The daughter cried and screamed as she watched her mother's horrific end from beyond the one-way. It's no fucking wonder she hates him! His daughter was then taken away by 2 researchers, with one taking hold of each arm. He was not even granted the opportunity to pursue his only remaining relative. Too fucking late, you fucking coward! Like, fucking hell, man! I just... You... He blamed himself for everything, as he should! Believing he had reaped what he himself had sowed. You reap what you sow. Regardless of his reasons, when he had resolved to continue the experiment 2 years ago, it had been obvious how things would end. Mere days after bearing witness to his wife's death, he vanished, and now nary a soul knew of his current whereabouts. Until today! I don't know. Probably not. Unless it's right now. Is it? After everything had settled, Senna had gone on to interrogate Kozupi about something with bloodshot eyes. And then after doing that for a bit, she ran off somewhere on her own. Kozupi had chased after her, but... Oh. But I, meanwhile, had just been staying put, still incredibly confused as to why Senna had become so obsessive all of a sudden. And now I was trudging to Shimokitazawa. My parents' house was only a short distance away. Walking from my base to it took less than half an hour. Could Nanami be there? Though not as busy as Shibuya itself, the roads of Shimoko... This is literally the same thing as the Jozoji Temple bit. The roads of Shimoki... wait, hold on. If I separate into 2 words, Shimokitazawa. The roads of Shimokitazawa were fairly crowded. I was being hit by the aftermath of that Esper debacle. Namely, some passerby looked at me with mocking sneers, while others even took pictures of me on their phones. Overwhelmed by embarrassment and humiliation, I hurried along the road to home.
ごめんね。
Rimi's eyes were pointed to the ground as she said that. She was walking a bit behind me, and in the time we'd spent moving along, she'd already repeated those words over 10 times.
黙ってて。ごめん。
No matter how much she apologized, I had no way of answering. I didn't know anything about Rimi. Nothing had changed ever since we'd first met. And yet, she supported me. She stayed by my side. But at the end of the day, there was still so much I didn't know about her. Even so, I'd always brushed that issue out of my mind. Perhaps it was because something in me knew that she wouldn't stay with me if I knew the truth. And that terrified me.
どうして僕と一緒にいてくれるの
I worked up the courage and asked her what was on my mind. I asked her the reason why she would stay with a guy like me. Was it because she was trying to lure me into a trap the entire time, just like Yua had? And yet, despite my suspicions, the answer she gave was nothing of the sort.
あなたに目覚めて欲しくないの。普通の生活を送って欲しかった。
Didn't want me to awaken, and she wanted me to live a normal life. Didn't want me to awaken? Like, as a gigalomaniac? Rimi knew more about me than I did.
一体君は何者なの
私は
Rimi hesitated a little.
私はタクの友達だって思ってる。
Do you?
友達でいたいな。
In other words, she was telling me to stop pushing? But there was no way I could stop there.
僕はギガロマニアックスなの
そうとも言えるし、違うとも言える。
I am, but I'm not? Which was it? Was she trying to dodge the question?
君は IR2 のこと知ってたの？
聞いたことがあるだけ。
She didn't say from who.
セナが言ってたのは本当なの？
嘘だよ。
I can't trust you on that. Lies. Telling me it was all lies was a lie in and of itself. I could tell just from looking at her.
君は
I was about to ask more, but I held my tongue. Are you my enemy, or are you my friend? Depending on the answer, I might not have been able to stay with Remy, so I didn't ask. If I pretended that nothing had happened, I could keep on deceiving myself just as I had been up until now. That way might be easier for me. Happier, even. Okay. That was what I was gonna do. I was gonna keep being ignorant and keep living a lie. A lie told by Remy. Remy had saved my ass so many times already, so there was no way any harm would come to me if I did that. I deserved to live a normal life, just like she'd said.
ありがとう。
I averted my eyes from her and swapped out my question for a few words of gratitude.
守ってくれて。
だから
I couldn't think of anything else to say, so I just continued walking toward my parents' house in silence. My eyes were eventually met with the familiar alleyway. It was a quiet, secluded residential area. Every now and then I could hear the faint sound of a train in the distance. I'd known this specific chunk of scenery ever since I was a little kid. This is where I'd grown up. I'd walked to both elementary school and middle school using this alleyway. If I headed through the narrow alleyway in front of me, my house would be right there. I was scared of seeing Nanami again, but I had to know for certain whether her arm was still there. I stopped and took a deep breath to calm myself, and then right when I was about to start walking again...
待って。
Uh-oh. I turned around to see Remy on the verge of tears.
どうしても行くの？ねえ、行かないで。
Is my family even alive?
もう普通じゃいられなくなるよ。私そんなの嫌だな。
Because that's what it feels like this is going to. What was that supposed to...
帰ろう。あのコンテナハウスに帰ろう。私タクが望む限りずっと一緒にいるから。それで一緒に学校に行って大臣と3人で他愛もない話をして、帰りに立ち食いそば屋さんとか CD ショップとかに寄って。
The more you're doing this, the more you're making me think, oh shit, my family doesn't even exist, do they?
そうやってこれからもやっていこうよ。
僕はナナミに会わなくちゃ。
いないよ、きっと。
She won't be there. Why was he so sure? Or was it just another lie? Would something bad happen to me if I went home? What if your home's not even there?
私タクの悲しむ顔見たくない。
So you say.
もう謎かけみたいなことはやめてよ。
I'd had enough. She was telling me to stay ignorant forever. I couldn't go on like this, pretending like I knew nothing. Of course I couldn't. Each and every person I knew just kept hitting me with nonstop cryptic nonsense. It never ended. I really did want to stay ignorant. I really did.
実家に行っちゃいけない理由があるなら言ってよ。こんな中途半端なのうんざりなんだ。
Sick of it? Did I have any right to say that? Wasn't I the one who always half-assed everything? Who never said what I really meant? Wasn't I the one who always ran away from everything? Yeah, I was. All the more reason to just keep doing that from now until forever. It was time to go home. Rimi was right. I didn't need to see Nanami at all. If I was planning on checking whether she had her right hand or not, then what the hell would I do if she didn't? Wouldn't that be all my fault? Nanami would hate me, resent me. All it would have done was solidify that I was a pathetic loser that couldn't even save his own little sister. If I left everything up in the air like it was now, I wouldn't have to be loaded with guilt. So, that was what I'd do. It was the optimal choice. Don't look at anything. No matter how many mysteries come your way, ignore them. Shut yourself away from the world.
ほんと世話が焼けるな。ナナがいないと何にもできないんだから。
ダメだ。
Nanami's cheerful voice popped into my head.
ダメだよ。
If I ran away now, I wouldn't be able to face Nanami for the rest of my life. I wouldn't be able to go back home for the rest of my life.
タク。
I clenched my fists and stepped forward into the narrow alleyway that led to my parents' house. I was less than 50 meters away now. At first, I just sped walked. Then I started running. Running toward the home I'd been raised in. 30 meters to go. 20 meters. 10. 0 meters. And when I looked, the house I knew was gone.
あれ
The name on the doorplate was wrong. It wasn't Nishijo. In fact, the entire shape of the house was wrong. It was far newer and nicer than the home I'd lived in. I looked around, I wondered if I'd made a mistake in one of the neighboring houses for mine. But I hadn't. Actually, none of the surrounding scenery lined up with my memories. I considered that maybe I'd gotten lost taking the wrong alley, but there was no way that could have happened. I'd recognized the entire route until now. I knew for a fact I remembered the route! But my home wasn't at the end of it! After taking the path from my memories, the scenery that should have been there hadn't appeared, and a completely unfamiliar one had instead. Jamais vu. What should have been a familiar place felt like I was setting foot in it for the first time.
シャメビューだ。
違うよ。
Rimi stood right behind me. She had denied my words immediately.
この世界にタクの帰る場所はないの。
In this world, you don't have a home to go back to. The sunset illuminated the lone corridor of the hospital. The lights were not turned on in the short period before night fell, rendering it fairly dim. The clamor of dinner time from before had calmed, and an eerie silence descended in its place. Shogun was slowly traveling down the corridor in his wheelchair. The creaking of the wheels echoed throughout the empty hall. Many nurses passed him by, but none spoke to him, nor even so much as glanced his way. Acting as though this was perfectly normal, Shogun continued to spin the wheels with his hands, emaciated skin and bone as they were. When he passed in front of one of the rooms, a male patient known as Yamai called out to him. He pointed at it with his index finger, sounding a frantic cry. Together with Yamai, the nurse had a face of complete befuddlement. Shogun isn't being seen. The nurse looked around, then looked at the man with a forced smile on her face. Despite the fact that Shogun was passing through the corridor right before her very eyes, the nurse spoke as if there was no one there at all. Raomi? Taomi? Yamai became increasingly worked up as he continued to cry out. Shogun simply ignored him and silently turned right at the end of the hallway. There it is! The wall, which had been cream-colored up until that very moment, suddenly changed to black. And yet, even though that wall stood right in front of him, Shogun did not halt his wheelchair. Right before he was about to collide with it, the black wall suddenly vanished. It quite literally had vanished. After the wall disappeared, a hidden corridor appeared from beyond its past reign. Shogun continued straight through it. He traveled another 20 meters before finally reaching a true dead end. At that dead end was a low door to a hospital room. Shogun opened the door and headed inside. It was the Phantom Hospital Room, the ghost story whispered about for many years, the tale of a room nobody knew of, and the person hospitalized within it. The name written upon the nameplate was Nishijo Takumi. Finished Chapter 8. Chapter 9. Gigalomaniac. Holy shit! How do I even process everything about that? Like, literally, no, you don't have a home to go back to, which is like implying that his family really doesn't exist. And, well, fuck, I guess, yeah, this is the moment where his mind is going to break and the worst possible scenario is about to happen. We learned a little bit more about Senna's backstory and how much of a fucking monster her father is. No, he's complicit in the evil that was unleashed upon his wife. He is complicit. He did not stand up to try to stop it. He took part in it. Holy shit. God damn, I am liking this novel. I think I've already made that perfectly clear. I mean, my gripes aside, holy shit. From the train windows, an indigo blue could be seen permeating the sky. The trains of the Yamanote line grew chaotic as businessmen and students alike made their way back to their homes. Two of its passengers, Kusunogi Yua and Yasuji Ban, stood shoulder to shoulder as they shook along with the commuting train, holding on to its hanging straps for stability. They were admittedly an odd pair, and perhaps due to how much they stood out, Yua had been feeling constant gazes coming from all around her. It would stand to reason that this was why she was repeatedly fidgeting with her hair and glasses. She still was not yet acquainted enough with the detective Ban to strike up a casual conversation with him. She had only met him a few days prior, after all. Shinjuku was only a single station away from Shibuya, and yet the 3 minutes it took to reach there felt helplessly longer than they should have. Ban simply stood silently, gazing out the window. He made no attempt to speak with Yua. Yua's current impression of Ban was that he did not seem to be a bad person, but that he was still somewhat frightening. She had met other detectives that were on the case involving her sister, but none of them had left an especially good impression. Perhaps that had left her with an unconscious prejudice against detectives, and by extension, Ban. or so she had concluded in her introspection.
だから地下15階の番人倒せば隠しダンジョン行けるだろ常識的に考えて
Real gamers don't talk to each other like that.
万人どこにいるかわからんなり。
Only tryhards talk like that. Ever since the two of them had boarded the train at Shinjuku Station, two men standing near the door had been talking in an excessively loud manner. Regardless of her desires, Yua was forced to listen to those two talking loud as could be, all without an ounce of consideration for those around them. I hate those kinds of people.
マップの左端の方だよ一目でわかるだろ番人
Bon? Again? Last time it was bonkers. Now it's bandits? Bandits?
っていうか万人と警官の区別つかないぞなもし。
いやいやどう見ても番人だろどこが警官なんだよ番人は銃持ってねえよ
The way he's saying it. Bon! Like his name! What the hell is going on? Are they like targeting Bon? Oh my god, they're targeting Bon because they're getting too close. That's why there are these weird coincidences with just bonkers and now bandits. The way they're pronouncing it. Fuck, okay. Both of them wore plain clothes, bandanas, fingerless gloves, and bulging rucksacks on their backs. The two were a pair of so-called otakus. Yua herself was interested in and thus consumed both anime and manga, so it was not their appearance that left her surprised. She had simply never been to Akihabara before, so it was her first time seeing a stereotypical otaku, complete with the clothes and everything. Realizing her curious glances were quite rude, she quickly averted her eyes. In the seat directly in front of her, a high school girl with brown hair and a navy blue blazer was typing a message on her cell phone. Her gaudy artificial nails tapped the screen repeatedly, and every time her fingers moved, her cell phone strap of a pistol swung back and forth. Naturally, Yua had seen the contents of her message. This was not through any fault of her own, however. The girl was holding her phone horizontally, giving everyone around her free rein to see everything she wrote. It was so easy to see, in fact, it was almost as if she wanted Yua to see it. Okay, so like, yesterday, went to Mixer with a couple of people and was so woo bring? Guy couldn't read room at all. So annoying. Like, oh my god. Oh my lord. I think I gave myself an aneurysm trying to decipher that. Despite being a high school girl herself, Yua could not even begin to grasp the contents of the message. It was possible that it could have been Gyaru speak, but to her it looked like nothing short of a coded message. I guess I can speak Gyaru if I was able to barely translate that. They're doing it again! Bon! All of a sudden, the voice of a child ran throughout the train's interior. Startled, Yua turned toward the source of the sound. A lone boy about 5 years of age stood right beside Bon. He held a squirt gun in his hand, its muzzle pointed straight at Bon. The boy even pulled the trigger, but no water came out from the end of it. Bon gave the child a big smile. His eyes, meanwhile, told a different story. However, despite the message Bon attempted to convey, the child showed no intention of stopping. A woman, likely his mother, rushed to her son's side. She turned toward Bon and politely bowed. The mother scolded her son in an attempt to make him stop, but her reprimanding never extended beyond verbal. She did not take the water gun from him, nor did she attempt to grab his hand. Bon's gonna die. All these things I am noticing, Bon's probably gonna die.
Yeah, 構いませんよ。
To Yua, the scene seemed very unnatural. The mother was clearly angry at her child and showed an apologetic demeanor toward Bon, but that was the only thing normal about it.
やめなさい、怒るわよ。
The boy remained completely indifferent and unresponsive, simply choosing to repeat the same word over and over again. And yet, despite his inaction, the mother made no attempt to stop him with anything other than words.
本当にすいません。
I hate this. I hate this feeling. And for some reason, Bon simply sat there and let the boy do as he pleased. In the end, the scene continued on and on until they arrived at Shibuya Station. Where's the third or fourth Bon thing here? Hold on. Upon coming to a full stop at the station, the train doors opened, but the mother and son showed no signs that they intended to disembark. Relieved, Yua exited onto the platform along with Bon. Taking a peek at his expression, she saw a clearly forced smile sitting upon his face.
お急ぎ中のお客様にお知らせいたします。地下鉄番号門線。
Mother!
失礼しました。半蔵門線は人身事故の影響でただいま振り替え運転を行っております。
Bon is a target.
お客様には大変ご迷惑をおかけして申し訳ございません。
最近よく感じるんだが。
A crowd of people came and went through the platform. As Bon walked along with that crowd toward the Hachiko gate, he began whispering to Yua.
まるで不特定多数の人間にストーカーされてるような気がするんだよな。
Yeah.
どういうことですか？
さっきみたいなことがよくあるって話さ。周囲の人間の何気ない行動がまるで自分への嫌がらせじゃねえかって思えてくるわけ。
They are. This was the reason why Bon had shown no reaction to the boy's mischief. Events such as those, ones that did not present much trouble, were becoming an everyday occurrence for him. Once he had begun picking up on it, it made it difficult for him to stay of sound mind.
まあ、考えすぎだろうが。俺みたいな地味なおっさんに興味があるやつなんてそうそういねえだろうし。
The fuck? I hate this. Oh my god, I hate the feeling I'm getting from I hate the feeling I'm getting from this. Like, now that I'm paying attention, I am hating this. Oh my god. Ugh.
ただ、集団ストーカーってのは確かに存在するんだよな。
Gang stalking. An organized form of stalking. Despite what the name implies, it does not mean that the group of people simply follow a victim. Instead, it refers to repeat minor offenses, often various forms of harassment, perpetrated against an individual by several individuals. In some cases, the harassment is done with such utter sophistication, the victim has no way to perceive the many incidents as connected. Specific examples of this harassment may include a victim being repeatedly bumped into by various people they don't know, a car honking endlessly in front of the victim's house late at night, people the victim has never met before alluding to private information only the victim should know. Even though each of these offenses are not a cause for worry when viewed alone, if they continue to occur several times a day over the course of several months, the victim will begin to deteriorate mentally. This eventually results in the victim growing terrified of everything around them, even the most mundane things that weren't actually intended to be part of the stalking effort, and no longer being able to trust anyone. However, there is a fine line between actual gang stalking and someone suffering from a persecution complex. So identifying gang stalking as such must be done with extreme caution. This is
普通のストーカー行為とは何が違うんですか？
被害を受けてる側からすると、相手の意図や目的、正体すら全くわかんねえんだ。ただ、誰かに行く先々で毎日のように様々な嫌がらせを受けていると感じる。
mass, like, intense paranoia.
集団ストーカーってのはそういうもんだ。
ただの考えすぎっていう可能性は？
十分にあり得るだろうな。脅迫観念と紙一重だ。俺の場合はそうでもなさそうなんだけどな。 ここ数日は相手もかなり直接的な手段に出てきてやがる。
Mm-hmm. And I picked up on him.
と言いますと。
手を引けって脅迫する匿名の電話が何度かかかってきてな。
For some reason, Bon laughed as he told her that. Yua, however, was frightened and wrapped her arms around herself in an attempt to bring her comfort.
それ大丈夫なんですか？
まあ、デカにはよくあることさ。
An occupational hazard? Upon saying that, Bon immediately stiffened his expression and looked at Yua.
ユアちゃんは最近そんなようなことはないかい？
はい。ないと思います。
身の回りでちょっとでも違和感を覚えることがあったらすぐにおじさんに言ってくれ。ユアちゃんの身の安全を守るのは警察の仕事だからな。
Bon's probably the only good cop.
はい。
Having listened to his words, Yua realized she was involved in something far more dangerous than she could have imagined.
あなたは妄想の存在なんだよ。
Oh, now we're back with Takumi and... Oh boy. You are a delusionary existence? Her voice a whisper, Rimi said something nonsensical. Ignoring what she said, I glanced at the various houses around me. In this place, well rooted in my memories, in this place I couldn't seem to recognize. Houses that should have been there were nowhere to be seen. Houses that shouldn't have been there were all I could see. The gap. The disparity between what I knew in my memories and the real scenery surrounding me was getting wider and wider. Yelling those thoughts aloud, I desperately denied the despair welling up in my heart. Yeah, there wasn't any gap. Not the slightest. I just taken a wrong turn. This wasn't the right street. It was just a misunderstanding on my part. There was nothing wrong with the world. To think otherwise, it would be ridiculous. Stumbling my way back down the street I'd come from, I burst into the neighboring alleyway. But just as I'd feared, between my memories and what I'd actually saw, something felt out of place. I realized that my entire body was soaked in sweat. My eyes refused to focus, and my feet didn't feel well secured to the ground. All these feelings together hit me with an intense wave of nausea.
なんでだよ。ここに僕の家があるのは間違いないんだ。僕はいつもここから小学校にも中学校にも通ってたんだ。小学校にはナナミと手をつないで登校してたし、中学は自転車で。
どこの中学校？
Rimi, who had been following me, quietly asked a simple question.
どこって？
なんていう学校？
そんなの決まってるじゃないか。地元の。
It's...
あれ、
I couldn't remember. I'd gone to middle school. I had clear memories of it, but I couldn't remember any of the finer details. It was as if some intense haze was covering my mind. The name of my middle school, which class I've been a part of, or even the name of my homeroom teacher. No specific names came to me.
そんなはずないんだ。ただ忘れてるだけで。
タク、聞いて。あなたの記憶にあるのはこの場所に家がある じゃなくて
I swear, if you say my house was right there, I'm gonna.
この場所に家があるはずっていう思い込み。
Oh, should be.
そうでしょ。
My sanity was hanging on by a thread.
だって僕はここに来るまでの道は覚えてるんだぞ。おかしいじゃないか。
それは作られた記憶だから。
Those memories were fabricated. Stop making that face. Rimi's eyes were pointed straight at the ground, and she looked terribly sad. Without looking up at me, she just continued saying the most confusing, nonsensical things. Things that, once again, I didn't understand. The things that were impossible to understand, so I stopped trying.
タクは中学には通ってないの。
わかったぞ。これドッキリでしょ。そうなんでしょ。きっとあれだ。そう、リミとナナミが実は知り合いとかで僕を二人して騙そうとしてるんだ。なんだ。そうかそうか。ビビった。
I tried my best to laugh it off, but Rimi didn't even so much as chuckle.
ごめん。私これからあなたを傷つけることを言わなくちゃ。
Nanami doesn't exist.
タク、あなたはね、
You don't have a sister?
本来いちゃいけない存在なんだよ。
Oh, that is even worse! Taku, you should never have existed.
嘘つくな。
She was just trying to deceive me. Rimi was my enemy, just like all the others.
貼り付けはリミの仕業だな。
If that was true, then what had happened at the crime scene when I first met her hadn't been a delusion. The true culprit behind Nugent wasn't the man I'd seen on the hospital TV earlier today. It was Rimi. She'd been monitoring me the whole time. She knew I'd witnessed everything, so she refused to let me out of her sight. Also, I could never tell anyone else what I'd seen. That was the sole reason she bothered staying with me all this time.
君はあの時血まみれだった。だから君が犯人だ。
あれはあなたの望んだ妄想。
The delusion I wished for?
ギガロマニアックスの妄想はね、強すぎる場合時に混じり合うの。
If a Gigalomaniac's delusion is too strong, it merges with other people's delusions?
妄想がシンクロするんだ。
Calmly, as though she was talking to herself, Rimi spoke. And yet her composure only served to piss me off even more. Oh no!
少なくともあの時、あの場所では4つの妄想がシンクロしてた。
No. A delusion happening here at this moment? What would happen? What would happen if I choose green? Will my sanity be protected? If I choose red, will it break? If I do nothing, what will happen?
Takuと私とニュージェネの犯人と
Four synchronized. Takumi, Rimi, the new gen culprit, and somebody else.
か。
Before she could continue, I cut her off. I then covered my ears and closed my eyes. Do I dare? If I let these delusions play out, is it really the right thing to do here? No. It's not.
これは妄想だ。そうだよ、妄想なんだ。いつもしているみたいな。
No. It's not, Takumi. That's why nothing's happening.
妄想はしないで。
She spoke in a quiet yet serious imperative tone. I gulped.
でないと私タクを消さなくちゃいけなくなる。
Erase me.
殺すの？
A chill ran down my spine. My perception of Rimi, the girl I'd thought would save me, was rapidly spiraling. Now she was turning into someone completely unrecognizable to me.
殺すんだな。やっぱり君が殺人犯なんだ。
So why? Why did she look so... Biting her lip as she fought back tears, hanging her head as low as could be, it all made me hesitant to accuse her of anything. Tell me it's all a lie. Tell me it's all a prank so we can laugh it off. If you do, we can go back to how it used to be between us. I want to go back.
だったら僕は何なの？
ギガロマニアクスの妄想によって作られた人間かな。
A person created through a gigalomaniac's delusions. I think I know the identity of Shogun. I think I know who Shogun is. Shogun is Nishijo Takumi. And the Nishijo Takumi that we have right now was created by him.
バカらしい。僕にはちゃんと記憶があるんだ。中学の頃の細かい記憶は思い出せないけど、忘れちゃっただけで。
あなたが生まれたのは1年半前なの。
Only a year and a half ago. A year and a half ago? That would have been when I just started high school.
だったら僕は1歳半の赤ん坊っていうことじゃないか。バブ言ってなくちゃおかしい。
タクは生まれた瞬間からタクだった。
From the moment you were born, you were yourself.
君がその目で見たって言いたいの？確かに僕らは1年半前から友達だったらしいね。僕は覚えてないけど。
私とあなたが会ったのは1ヶ月前。
I first met you a month ago.
貼り付けの現場。
So our first meeting was at the crucifixion crime scene.
私はもともと水明の生徒じゃないから。
Rimi was a complete schizo. A complete and utter schizo, just like all the others. No, not just schizo, super schizo. She was at a tier not even Senna or Ayase could hope to match.
誰が僕を妄想したの？言ってみてよ。
西條匠くんだよ。
Nishijo Takumi created him.
は アウト。僕が妄想なんでしょ。その僕が妄想して僕を作ったって矛盾してるじゃないか。はい、論破終了。それとも君の妄想、君が勝手に作り出した君だけの脳内設定なんでしょ。僕をそれに巻き込まないでよ。
私だってタクには知ってほしくなかった。ここにも来てほしくなかった。
But we just kept pushing.
もっと強く引き止めればよかったね。
Then, gathering her resolve, Rimi raised her head and looked straight at me. Her eyes glimmered with sincerity. It didn't seem like she was lying. She felt entirely genuine.
でもここまで来たら本当のことを知ってもらった方がいいと思う。
Oh boy. Gonna see if my theory's right. But it wasn't the truth. It was all a lie. It had to be. Otherwise, my last thread of sanity would snap. Besides, who would ever believe someone who suddenly decided to hit them with, "Oh yeah, BD dubs, you're a delusion"?
あなたの行動が他の人の命を削っていくんだって知ってもらった方が。
Shogun.
そうだ。ナナミは僕が妄想だったら僕と血がつながってるナナミも両親も妄想ってこと？そんなのむちゃくちゃ。
ナナちゃんはいるよ。
She does? From the way Rimi talked about her, it was almost as if she knew her.
ナナミを誘拐したのは君なの。
似たようなものかもね。
It might as well be.
私はタクを守ることに気を取られすぎてナナちゃんが狙われる可能性を考えてなかった。
I never considered the possibility that they would target her.
私は誘拐犯のこと知ってる。
She really was a demon girl. I was right. I'd always been right. Rimi was the only one I wanted to be on my side, and even though I'd always believed that, there had always been more than enough reasons to doubt her. And yet, even so, I'd feigned ignorance and simply trusted that she'd keep her promise to stay by my side. But despite all that, just like you, Rimi was...
君も僕を裏切るんだね。
そうだね。私はタクを裏切った。隠し事たくさんしてた。ごめんね。私のこと恨んでいいよ。
謝られたって僕は信じない。信じられない。
Despite my words, it was impossible for me to prove that I was real. All the supernatural things I'd seen up until now flashed through my mind, and that's when I knew I couldn't just laugh off her words as some insane ass pull. As I thought that, Rimi slowly began to approach me and then... embraced me. Taken completely by surprise, I surrendered myself to her. I could feel her warmth. She had saved me. She had saved my soul. She had taught me nothing but kindness. But now, despite being in the center of her embrace, her warmth could not have felt more distant.
そろそろ行かなきゃ。
行くってどこへ？
ナナちゃんをさらった誘拐犯のところ。決着つけなくちゃいけないの。ナナちゃんのことも他のことも。このままだと タクも守りきれないし。
そんなの無責任だ。僕にここまでひどいこと言っておいて逃げるの。
Mimi started inching away from me. One step, then another. Slowly she distanced herself.
戻ってくるから、タクは部屋にいて。そしたらまた一緒にいろいろ楽しいお話ししよう。あなたはあそこにいてもいいんだよ。
Such a gentle tone. Even though she had said all those cruel things, why was she still being so nice to me?
でも一つだけ約束。もう妄想はしない。ね。
Okay.
タクの妄想力はとっても強いから。妄想すればするほど本物のあなたの命が削られていっちゃうんだ。
The more delusions you have, the more the lifespan of the real you gets whittled away.
何を。
それじゃあまた明日。石。
Rimi struck a pose, saluting me with the most unnatural smile on her face. It could not have been more forced. And only a moment later, from her eyes, quiet tears began to fall. Rimi frantically turned her back to me, and as her shoulders started to tremble, she ran away. And I, having been left behind in a stupor, sank helplessly to my knees.
本物の僕ってなんだよ。
The real me couldn't live the life that he wanted. That's why he was in a hospital bed. Because he was so painfully sick and very just utterly sickly. That flashback we had with Nanami, that was a memory of the real Takumi.
僕は偽物じゃない。
His delusions to live a normal and happy life created the Takumi that we have right here. All color vanished from the world. All hope I had once had was gone. My very existence had been denied. There was no meaning in me being here. Not even my death held any meaning. Rimi had left me, leaving behind a meaningless husk. She was my enemy. She had deceived me. And now, having said her piece, she'd probably lost her final remaining reason to be with me.
戻ってくるはずない。
Rimi had abandoned me. But of course she had. I was a delusionary existence, according to her. A monster. Forget it. I didn't care anymore. With no willpower to even stand up, I just stayed there, still unable to organize my thoughts, incapable of crying due to the sheer shock. The twilight wind robbed me of all warmth, and the very little that remained of Rimi's faded completely. As I looked up at the sky for no particular reason, I gazed at the sunset. A sunset that had almost been completely eroded by the dark of night.